very shortly. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Just giving folks a few more minutes to trickle in.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's DoD Environmental Planning and Conservation webinar series presentation. Today's session is titled Managing Prairie Ecosystems and Recovering Species, a case study on collaborations and partnerships from Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Today's presenter is Dan Calvert, Joint Base Lewis-McChord Sentinel Landscapes Partnership Coordinator. Today's presentation will be recorded and then posted on the Natural Resources DNX website under Resources. Before we get started, please take a moment to make sure your phones and web browsers are on mute. With that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, as you just heard, I am Dan Calvert, the Program Coordinator for the Joint Base Lewis-McChord, or JBLM Sentinel Landscape Program. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about some of the work that we're doing in Western Washington and the South Puget Sound region. It's a special area with some innovative and interesting conservation work occurring. Quick overview of what I'm planning on covering today here. We'll talk about prairies in Western Washington, the role of JBLM as a prairie habitat stronghold, and what that means for the mission of the installation, and then some collaborative approaches to managing complex natural resource management issues. This talk focuses on prairies. Here is a map of the historic areas of glacial outwash prairies and oak woodlands in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. It's a pretty big geography. I want to focus on a specific portion of it in Western Washington, the South Puget Sound region. So this is a map of Joint Base Lewis-McChord, or JBLM. You can see some of the training areas on there. Try and note the artillery impact area there in the middle of the base, kind of the tan portion. Continuing to kind of get us grounded here, we are just south of the Tacoma, Seattle major urban area. It's highly urbanized. To the north of us there, a little more rural to the south and east of us. And then zooming in a little more, I always think it's really amazing to look at this and to see how sharply delineated the base is. Again, really highly developed around it, a little more urban, a little more rural, excuse me, to the south and east, but that is kind of changing. So here is a picture of the prairies in bloom. It is a very special landscape. These prairies are unique for many reasons. It's a distinct ecosystem, but it's the result of intensive management, mostly through the use of fire. Since time immemorial by Native Americans, it's always been a highly managed natural landscape. So Native Americans manage these areas to support plant and animal populations. The purple flowers you see here are camas. The bulbs of these plants were important food sources. There are about 7 tribes whose usual and custom areas overlap some portion of JBLM. I'll talk more about tribal engagement efforts later on in my presentation here. So I'm probably preaching to the choir, but military installations and DoD are amazing conservation leaders. There are just so many examples where they're the most substantial, the only remaining habitat for an endangered ecosystem is found on a military base. One of my colleagues from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service informed me that DoD lands have the highest numbers of ESC listed species across all federal lands. And JBLM is a great example of this. It used to be about 150,000 acres of prairie in Puget Sound region. It's down to about 23,000 acres now, 90% of which is located on JBLM. The prairie areas were flat, fertile ground where European Americans first established farms and communities. So changing land use patterns and changing land management has impacted the prairie condition here. Landscape scale burning ceased about 150 years ago. This means that the fires that kept these areas open and limited woody and plant growth have been really reduced. So the loss of prairies is due to changing land management. The region is going through a lot of population growth with tremendous development occurring in the area, and the remaining intact prairie is threatened by different kinds of development. It's interesting, some of the best remaining prairie habitat are the places that get the most disturbance, specifically the artillery impact area there. It's a place that burns on a regular basis and nobody goes there. So JBLM has 90% of the remaining prairie habitat in the South Puget Sound region. Because of some of the best last habitat, it's some of the last strongholds for a number of prairie species, including those you see on the slide here. There's several species of Mazama pocket gophers. They thrive in certain types of glacial outwash soils. Street-torn larks prefer open grassland areas. The classic examples are near runways and airstrips. There's some regular management conflicts due to FAA mowing requirements near runways. Mowing can disturb nests. Taylor's checker spot butterfly, or TCB as we refer to them here often. There are multiple sensitive butterfly species on JBLM, but the base is the last real metapopulation for Taylor's checker spot butterfly. And some of the best Taylor's checker spot butterfly habitat is in the artillery impact area. There's been some really significant population crashes lately for Taylor's checker spot butterfly. No one's quite sure why, but we believe there's a climate change nexus. Additionally, the Oregon Vesper sparrow, which is not pictured here, likely to be listed soon, also utilizes JBLM. So these species are listed because they're not doing well, largely due to diminishing habitat from development and other land use changes. But then climate change, again, is also an additional factor. Prairies are dependent on disturbance and management. This is, so the use of prescribed burning, again, is one of the key tools, but there are a range of other actions like spraying and mechanical removal of invasives. These are some images from prairie restoration work being done on JBLM. So speaking of invasives, development, again, is a major driver of prairie loss, but then the changing land use and the lack of fire has allowed different plant communities to take root. There's a few invasive species that are particularly problematic. Here are two examples: Scotch broom and wheat canary grass. Scotch broom, a very hardy plant that loves the dry, rocky prairie soils. It can form monocultures with seeds that can remain viable for decades. It requires ongoing management for years to keep it knocked down, and as soon as you stop, it tends to pop back up. Wheat canary grass, another issue I'm sure other folks are familiar with, more of an issue with wetter soils. These are just two examples, but there are many invasives as well that my partners deal with. A few more pictures of restoration and management on JBLM. Up in the top left there, creating a prairie seed bed. On the right there, that is girdling a conifer. So again, with the lack of fire, woody plants have started to kind of grow in places where they did not grow historically. So that's trying to address some of the conifer encroachment. And then this other was kind of a cool picture of creating a cavity nest on some the forested areas on JBLM. So again, a quick summary of JBLM. It's about 90,000 acres, 12,000 acres of glacial outwash prairies, some big habitat for Mazama pocket gophers. Those are two of the subspecies of the Yelm and Roy prairie pocket gophers. 4 breeding populations of the street-torn larks. The last metapopulation of Taylor's checker spot butterfly. Nearly all the Oregon Vesper sparrows in Washington State, and then many other regionally rare species and habitats. Okay, so there's the background on the prairie habitat. Now I want to talk about, kind of pivot to the military significance of JBLM. So JBLM was one of the primary power projection platform installations in the Pacific Theater. This is the DoD group, so I'm guessing you understand the term encroachment, but just in case, encroaching can mean different things, but there's a very specific definition in the context of military installations. It is something that impacts the military mission and training flexibility. Basically anything that impacts how the military can use the installation. The main encroachment factors at JBLM are regulatory restrictions from the presence of ESA species on the base, and then incompatible development around the installation. And incompatible development means conflict with the immediate neighbors who complain about things like smoke, noise, air traffic, etc. The South Sound region is growing rapidly, and so development is a major issue, and this kind of conflict is ongoing. The base is huge, and it's also a huge part of the local economy. The population of the Joint Base is about 110,000 people, 40,000 active duty soldiers, 60,000 family members, and about 15,000 civilian contract employees. So JBLM is important. It's an important training area and operational launch point for the military. So there is significant motivation to address encroachment risk concerns. So again, the primary encroachment drivers are the presence of ESA listed species. They limit how the military can train and operate on the base. The main solutions are conserving off-base habitat as a means of supporting species recovery off the base. I think at some portion, like half the base is off limits during parts of the year due to species-related regulatory restrictions. And there are some pretty serious consequences if a soldier does something like that negatively impacts prairie habitat, like driving an off-road vehicle in the wrong place. So protecting off-base habitat is mitigation for on-base impacts is a solution, but it's not necessarily easy. Much easier said than done. The recovery plans for the list of species I mentioned a moment ago focus on identifying off-base habitat. So JBLM can theoretically, and our partners can theoretically mitigate for on-base habitat impacts by protecting off-base habitat, but acquisition and protection is highly competitive, and it's a challenging thing to do here. We have to work with, so in trying to protect off-base habitat, we have to work with Yellow Book appraised values, but developers are often willing to pay double, triple, sometimes more than that of appraised values. Hard to compete with that sometimes. With a few exceptions, the majority of the remaining undeveloped land around JBLM is in agriculture. There are agricultural practices like ranching operations that are conducive to maintaining prairie habitat, grazing, specifically intensive rotational grazing during certain times of the year can be important management tools. So much of the work that I'm doing and working with some of our partners I'm going to talk about here shortly is finding ways to work with farmers and ranchers. So addressing the training restrictions on the base requires doing work off the base, and the military isn't really positioned to do this kind of work off the base, which was the genesis for the Sentinel Landscape Program. So what is the Sentinel Landscape Program? It's a coalition of federal agencies, state and local governments, and NGOs working with private landowners to advance sustainable land management practices around military installations and ranges. It was founded in 2013 by the DoD, Department of Agriculture, and Department of the Interior. So locally here at JBLM, our federal partners are DoD, NRCS, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And there are a range of local partners who support the organization. The mission is to strengthen military readiness, conserve natural resources, support agricultural viability, and increase climate resilience. So other partners include federal agencies that I mentioned there, state agencies, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Natural Resources, conservation districts, municipalities, NGOs like land trusts and conservation organizations. So there's currently 18 Sentinel landscapes around the country connected to different installations. Some of the Sentinel landscapes have multiple installations associated with them. JBLM was the first Sentinel landscape. It was an idea that was kind of spearheaded and pitched by several local partners that caught the attention of DoD. They liked the idea of this kind of structured collaboration, decided to scale it up across the country, and here we are today. So I am part of a cohort of other coordinators, and there's kind of this nationwide infrastructure that I'm part of. We all communicate at least once a month. We're in the process of developing kind of more robust learning networks, and we meet on a regular basis. So again, the South Sound prairie habitat and the associated species on JBLM and the need to conserve off-base habitat was one of the primary drivers for the formation of the JBLF Sentinel Landscape Partnership Program. So here are our priorities. These priorities were collaboratively developed by the partners who's sitting at our table. We spent the better part of the last year working on updating our strategic implementation plan, and these are kind of the high-level framing for our efforts. Military readiness, this means increasing military training flexibility on JBLN by creating opportunities to conserve prairies and listed species. Also, reducing the potential for public conflict by conserving working lands and limiting incompatible development near the installation. We are not anti-development, just thinking about how to limit potential conflict. Okay, so regional agricultural resilience. Maintaining the South Puget Sound agricultural landscape by promoting mutually beneficial projects supporting local ag viability, sustainable community development, and stewarding the integration of prairie conservation and agricultural practices on working lands. Part of this is recognizing we need to maintain and support a critical mass of working lands and farmers, and thinking about kind of the social and economic fabric as part of this. As you lose a farm, you can lose some of the supporting businesses associated with that, and that means the remaining farmers have a harder time getting the parts they need. It's harder for them to stay viable. You lose some of the social acceptance for things like tractors on roads and small ag operations. So we really are thinking about ag viability on a regional scale. Ecosystem conservation. This is protecting and enhancing native species populations and their habitat by promoting functional ecological systems and processes. And then tribal co-management. This is a new priority for us. I'll be the first to admit it's a work in progress. I want to be really careful about kind of seeing what it is and what it is not at this point in time. I think I mentioned there are at least 7 treaty tribes whose usual and custom areas overlap some portion of Joint Base Lewis-McChord, but there's really 3 main tribes whose UNAs overlap with the primary areas where we're doing work in kind of the southern portions of the base. We are in the process of building relationships with these tribes, and several projects in the way that I'll describe shortly here. So each Sentinel landscape has identified a geographic footprint or boundary that is developed according to their unique priorities and resource concerns. These priorities and resource concerns are also kind of the primary drivers for the partners who participate. So here's a map of our programmatic footprint. Our priorities relate to prairie grasslands and oak woodlands and the 3 ESA listed species. These are sometimes referred to as the mission critical species. Their habitats are prairie and grasslands. So our additional priorities include supporting regional ag viability and resilience. Again, this is both for limiting development and then advancing species recovery efforts. So this boundary was developed based on prairie habitat for the listed species I mentioned earlier, prime agricultural lands, the NRCS biological opinion, and some of the historic areas of prairie and grasslands in our region. Here's a graphic illustrating the structure of our Sentinel landscape and partner organizations. A little busy. The executive leadership group is a decision-making body for our group. It is comprised of representatives from the logo you see on the slide here. All of these groups have a direct interest in our priorities and have decided to allocate staff and resources to participate in our processes. They see value in working together. Description of these groups: so Eco-Studies Institute and the Center for Natural Land Management, they are NGOs focusing on prairie conservation, restoration, and management. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service plays a key role in regulatory and recovery objectives. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife supports habitat conservation and species recovery at the state level. The Thurston Conservation District focuses on supporting working landowners and habitat recovery. NRCS plays a similar role. Thurston County, down at the bottom, they are a municipality with a habitat conservation plan, also focusing on the 3 mission critical species that I mentioned here. So they also need to conserve habitat to mitigate for future development. So Thurston County and JBLN are both trying to recover habitat. So there's other organizations that aren't formal members, but they still play key roles. For example, Washington State University Extension, they help support relationships and programs with working landowners. So moving down here, the Planning and Implementation Committee is comprised of local and federal partners focusing on implementation. This is where the rubber meets the road and things get done. This group is impressive, tremendous amount of expertise and capacity. People prioritize sitting at this table, which I think speaks volumes to the perceived value. You see my role as a coordinator there. I am trying to coordinate the efforts of these different groups. I'm connecting people and organizations to help identify shared needs and work across organizational and bureaucratic silos. I work in the DoD world, and I can assure you that there's some very resilient silos in here. Participation is completely voluntary. I can't make anyone do anything, for better or worse, but people generally see value in working together to develop and advance our shared priorities. So again, I'm kind of trying to herd the cats, keep us all moving forward, and my position is funded mostly by Department of Defense and NRCS. And down at the bottom, we have several working groups comprised of partners with kind of expertise and interest in advancing specific projects. We currently have a land protection working group, communication and outreach working group, and a Taylor's Check-a-Spot butterfly working group. So we all want to know, we all kind of know what we want to do, but knowing and having the requisite resources are different things. We spend a lot of time working on pursuing funding. Coordinating grant and project development is a big piece of my job. Our partners are very savvy in pursuing different resources of funding capacity support, working at state, local, philanthropic, lots of different opportunities. But one of the primary funding sources is the Readiness and Environmental Protection and Integration, or REPI program. This is the DoD talk, so I'm guessing most people are familiar with this program. It's a DoD program focusing on managing natural resources around military installations. It is one of the most flexible funding sources out there. And I think it might be the only federal funding source that can serve as a match for other federal funding sources. So REPI supports our work and local partners in different ways. Here's a few examples. Landowner outreach and engagement. Our extension and conservation district partners are doing landowner outreach and engagement to work with local community. We rely on the voluntary cooperation of local landowners. So this outreach is essential for doing any work on private property. Conserving habitat and working lands. This is mostly working to protect the remaining prairie habitat and working lands around the installation to limit development there. Natural resource management. Lots of different coordinated efforts to do landscape scale restoration and management. Also providing technical support for working landowners and private landowners. Staff and organizational capacity. You can't get anything done without people, but funding people to do this work is often very challenging. So REPI is an amazing resource for supporting the capacity and helping our organizational partners kind of keep their lights on. And this bottom bullet there, the sustained component, building and maintaining collaboration takes time, takes commitment. It involves building relationships and trust and understanding like the lay of the land and local politics. This is my full-time job. I am constantly working to coordinate the priorities and work of our partners. And REPI and the Sentinel Landscape Program recognizes the importance of this and funds this effort, which I think is just invaluable. Next, I am going to show a few examples of work that our partners are doing. This is work that's happening off base. Much of this is really similar to work that's occurring on JBLM. This is no accident. There's a robust ongoing dialogue and information sharing between our local partners and the natural resource management staff on JBLM. Part of the Sentinel Landscape kind of framework and effort is intentional co-learning and adaptive management to advance our shared goals and objectives. I mentioned we spent a lot of the last year updating our strategic implementation plan. So the project I'm going to describe here now have been intentionally designed to align with and advance this. So habitat restoration, this is work that's happening on and off the base. It can sometimes be the same people working in same areas. As I said earlier, there's great communication between the resource management staff on JBLM and our non-DoD partners. There's really strong co-learning and idea sharing. Prescribed burning, again, a critical tool for prairie restoration and management. Climate change is making it harder to use this tool. There's been some really unfortunate examples of prescribed burns getting out of control. Everyone is aware of the catastrophic wildfires that are regularly occurring. There was an interesting situation we had this year in August where there were good local conditions to do prescribed burns, but there was a statewide burn ban in place, so our partners were kind of hampered. Our executive leadership group helped to develop some policy workarounds, and our local partners were able to do burns. Prescribed fire creates some conflict with development near the base. People don't like the smoke coming in their neighborhoods. So it's a critical management tool that can be tricky to use. Two of our partners are involved with plant and seed production. The availability of plant and seeds is a constant bottleneck in prairie restoration and management. Really hard to support creating adequate supplies of this critical need. One of our partners, the Center for Natural Land Management, owns and operates a nursery. Okay, the Sustainability in Prisons Project. I wish I could spend the whole time talking about this. This is a partnership between Evergreen State University, a college here in Olympia, and the Washington State Department of Corrections. This is a program where incarcerated individuals are growing prairie plants and seeds and captive rearing different species, including Taylor's checker spot butterfly, but they're also have been producing like other listed species I haven't mentioned yet, like Oregon spotted frog. And they're really good at it, actually. They are very effective in the work that they're doing. I've had the opportunity to interact with some of these incarcerated individuals involved with this work. It's powerful talking to these folks. It's work and they're in a tough situation, but they are really committed to the mission here. Many of these incarcerated people have had really limited educational opportunities and had no exposure to natural resource management careers. Hearing some of them talk about the impacts of being involved with this is literally brought tears to my eyes. They've been able to receive college credits, and some of them are aspiring to pursue natural resource management careers upon their release. It is just an amazing program. Can't say enough good things about it. Another key piece is landowner outreach and engagement. We did a GIS analysis of our Sentinel landscape geography and identified 450,000 individual parcels in our geography. So working with local landowners, especially agricultural landowners, is just a key priority. Some of our NGO, university, and federal partners have been working with local ranchers to identify BMPs benefiting the economic and ecological bottom line. This involves scientific research on working lands. It's been a big step for farmers to let scientists access their lands and their properties. Some of the findings identify that intensive rotational grazing with some critical rest periods during spring bloom can have beneficial impacts on prairie plant abundance and diversity. We have some partners from the Partners for Fish and Wildlife, NGOs, and Extension who are working to build peer-to-peer learning between agricultural producers to increase awareness and kind of receptiveness to different management strategies. This involves identifying local champions who are willing to kind of reach out to some of their peers and describe the benefits of adopting different practices and try and encourage some of their peers to think about new management practices. They're having really good outcomes, and I think some of this comes down to tapping the basic stewardship ethic that it's just inherent part of being a farmer or a rancher. So talking about the REPI program, I want to highlight some of the work that has been part of two recent REPI Challenge proposals. There's different colors of REPI, but REPI Challenge is one of them. So this REPI Challenge award involved collaborations from I think at least 7 organizations doing work at a landscape scale, focusing on prairie restoration here. So the first thing is identifying that we needed somebody who can look holistically across the region and say different partners are doing this work and they need different types of plants and seeds. And so identifying somebody who can facilitate coordination with those people there, integrating actions at a landscape scale for managing, recovering habitat and listed species. And this includes identifying some indigenous priorities for traditional plants and foods. We're creating a shared resource crew. The idea there is that instead of each organization having their own crew, we have one crew that works regionally and can kind of help work across organizations to advance our shared needs and do work that we all agree upon as a priority. Integrating tribal priorities. So this is taking a couple different forms. This is doing actual prairie restoration work on reservations, the Nisqually and Chehalis tribe reservations. This is doing some training for cultural burning for our NGO partners leading that work. And we have plans to do a future co-management workshop. We're going to help trying to better understand tribal priorities for managing prairie ecosystems in our area. Also funded captive rearing for butterflies, increasing landowner outreach and engagement, and then thinking about ways to improve prairie habitat for on grazing lands. Another Repi Challenge award that we got recently, this one really focused more on climate and agricultural resilience here. So again, trying to encourage broader adoption and better understanding of some of the rotational grazing strategies I've been talking about. Trying to encourage some landowners to consider silvopasture and agroforestry. This is some real cutting edge approaches to addressing climate resilience and ag viability, kind of integrating some of those concepts there. Soil health improvements, thinking about how do you amend soil to have better outcomes. And native seed industry development, we're trying to encourage some local producers to consider shifting their operations over to growing plants and seeds to address this shortage we have in our area. And that's that check the box of ag viability, limiting development, and addressing some of the encroachment concerns with the availability of plants and seeds. And then reintroducing street-torn larks, one of the listed species. I want to quickly touch on this. This could be like a multi-hour talk in itself, but conservation crediting program, if we're going to spend Repi dollars, if we're going to spend DoD dollars, there needs to be kind of like some official framework for documenting the outcomes there. So this is the framework for this. I just wanted to really just put this out there, and I can follow up afterwards to help connect any questions with the appropriate people. But it's basically quantifying the impacts of investments for advancing species recovery efforts and kind of justifying the investments of the public funds. I wanted to highlight a quick win that we've had recently. This is an ESA delisting of golden paintbrush. This was due in part to efforts of a single landowner, largely, who kind of changed how he was managing grazing on his property. Very beautiful plant and a great story. I'm getting close to wrapping things up here, so I'll try and kind of tie things together. Spent a lot of time talking about the whatever the hard science, but I'm more of a social scientist and focusing on this collaboration piece here. There are some unique circumstances that play key roles in Sentinel Landscape Partnership, but I think there's some transferable concepts and ideas. We have many partners sitting at the table doing work at the local and regional scale. Different groups have different priorities. Our partnerships works by identifying kind of where things overlap. We use this Venn diagram analogy of identifying kind of the sweet spot in the middle and figuring out how to work together. As we work together, we realize that spot might be bigger than we thought it was. This really is a true partnership. The groups are sitting at the table, they're choosing to participate. There is kind of like the structure and federal partnership and a regulatory framework that's essential parts of the foundation, but it only works through voluntary cooperation and collaboration. Here's a really gross oversimplification of what I think makes our program work. Leadership commitment. We have an executive leadership group comprised of kind of mid to high level agency staff who've committed to sitting at the table. They give their time, but almost more importantly, they allocate staff time to supporting our processes. Shared goals. I mentioned our implementation plan. It is not perfect, but it's something we've all agreed to. There's a lot we want to do, but you have to refine your goals. If everything's important, then nothing's important. So we have this resource that's informing what we want to do and helping us prioritize. Just the basic resources. We spend a ton of time pursuing funding, as I'm sure everyone out there does as well. We get a lot of partner participation. As you all know, just going after funding is a huge time and capacity commitment, but our partners can justify the investment because the payoff means we all benefit. And again, we're all working towards kind of mutually agreed upon goals. And this last bullet there is crucial. What we're doing is hard, but we're in it together. We have standing monthly meetings for the whole group and regular smaller meetings that focusing on advancing some of our different moving parts. For example, developing funding proposals. Not everyone has the capacity to participate. We have a core group of dedicated folks that can help write proposals. And then I guess some takeaways here. Recognize the strength of partnerships here. Thinking about integrated projects. There's value in thinking about multi-benefit or really a better term again is integrated projects. This is creating the spaces to foster interdisciplinary discussions and planning to develop shared goals and priorities. It's never going to be perfect, and there has to be an iterative, kind of adaptive management component, constant kind of like willingness to learn and consider new ideas. Once you get it going, though, you can build on previous work and relationships. Social capital, it's just crucial. Collaboration takes sustained commitment and work. There needs to be someone driving the train. There needs to be regular structured communication. For example, our monthly meetings to build awareness of what different entities are working on and to stay focused on advancing our shared goals. The unstructured interactions are also super valuable and maybe even more important. Think back to maybe recent conferences or meetings you went to. Did you get more done in the meeting or drinking beer afterwards? And then incentives to participate. This work takes resources and capacity. Time is money. There has to be an ROI for sitting at the table. Getting resources needs to be part of the discussion. The funding landscape is increasingly competitive. There's a lot of competition, but collaboration and bringing different partners together usually is going to be a better strategy for pursuing funding. Okay, try to cover a lot of ground there. I'm happy to stop now and take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. We will now begin the Q&A portion of this presentation. Participants may use the raise hand function and wait to be called before unmuting and asking their question. Participants may also submit their questions to the chat. Back over to you, Dan.
Oh, questions.
If I may seize MC's prerogative for a minute. You mentioned that for better or for worse, you can't force anyone to work with Sentinel landscapes, so you have to find some shared goals. I was just curious, in your experience, what shared goals do you most often emphasize or find most effective in fostering that lasting collaboration?
Shared goals. Again, I think it relates to our resource concerns, and that is managing the agreed upon strategies for managing prairie and oak woodlands and like what does it take to get that done. But then recognizing there's multiple ways to achieve those outcomes and that, touching on the habitat specific work, but then also thinking about some of the work we're doing with agricultural landowners to identify some more innovative or new ways to skin the cat or to achieve the desired outcomes.
Looks like we have a question from Tad. Tad, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
You see that Zach Radmer's on the conversation. Have you been coordinating with the work they're doing on creating the biological opinion? All right, could you give us some discussion about your interaction?
Yeah, I work very closely with Zach. He's on speed dial for me. And so I hesitated whether or not to even, I briefly mentioned it there. It's a critical piece of the work that we're doing. Yeah, much, what we're doing here is trying to develop off-base habitat work where there has to be some quantitative targets and justifications for the investments in the REPI funding, the public dollars that we're utilizing. And so Zach has played a key role in a partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Defense in developing this conservation crediting biological opinion. That's, again, justifying the investments for off-base work. They're also doing on-base work as well. Maybe I'll kick it over to Zach since he's here to see if he wants to touch on any of those concepts.
Sure. Yeah. The conservation crediting program was our first attempt at quantifying that training relief. And what Tad is referring to, and we've been working on, is through the Conservation Policy Initiative under the Recovery and Sustainment Partnership, we're coming up with new ideas. And so we've got a final biological opinion it's ready to sign. It's in review with Installation Management Command right now. And it sort of takes that relief to the next level. And then JBLM can choose to earn that relief through either program. And yeah, Dan and I talk most days.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Zach, you want to pop your email in the chat if people have questions, they can follow up with you?
Absolutely.
Aaron, thanks. I appreciate your question there. Yeah. So funding comes from different sources. As I mentioned, REPI is providing a lot of funding for them. I think, and one of the grants I mentioned, I think they got $600,000 to support their work. They're also work closely with JBLM directly. I know that JBLM has been paying them to captive rear some of the species. Some of the state agencies have been supporting them as well, our NGO partners. So they are scrappy people who are good at pursuing different funding sources. So it's a constant struggle. They're operating at a pretty bare bones basis, but they are effective at what they're doing. So it's come from all over the place. I'd love to see that model expanded to other parts of the country. Stay at MOA with them. Gosh, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody from JBLM is on who could help clarify that piece. Yeah, and I can't answer the specifics of the contracting, but I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards if you want to get some more information on that, Aaron.
As a reminder, audience members can use the chat, or if you don't have access to the chat, feel free to use the raise hand option. And if no one has any final questions, Dan, are there any last word you'd like to get in?
No, just thanks everyone for your attention. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say and talk about some of the work that we're doing. If anything pops in your head in the future, I'd be more than happy to follow up and talk with you one-on-one. I covered a lot of ground at a very high level and many layers to the content I discussed here. So feel free to reach out again with any follow-up questions. Thanks so much for your time.
And thank you very much, Dan, for taking the time out of your day to share your insights and experience with our audience today. This concludes today's presentation. As a reminder, a recording of today's presentation will be posted on the Natural Resources Denix website under the Resources page. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a great rest of your day.